flush that had snuck over her cheeks. Because everyone in ALO had wings, there was no fast travel system. The trip to Aln, the city at the center of Alfheim that sat around the World Tree, was equivalent to a real-life journey. The offer she'd just made to this boy she'd met just a few hours before was simply unfathomable. But she just couldn't let him go alone. "Will you be on tomorrow?"
Yeah.
"Meet here at 3:00 p.m. then. I've got to leave for now. Go to the inn upstairs to log out. See you tomorrow." Before she'd even finished speaking, Leafa was waving her hand to bring up the game menu. She could log out instantly anywhere in Sylph territory, so she smacked the button at once.
Hey, wait!
Kirito blurted out, and she looked up to see him smiling at her.
Thanks.
She did her best to smile back, and then nodded before hitting the OK button. The world flashed into a rainbow of light, and then blacked out. The sensations of Leafa's body faded away until only the burning of her cheeks and racing of her heart remained. Her eyes opened slowly. The first thing she saw was the familiar ceiling of her room and the large poster she'd pinned to it. It was a custom-made poster of an in-game screenshot blown up as large as she could get it. The picture was of a flying fairy with a long ponytail in the midst of a flock of birds and endless blue sky. Sukaha Kirigaya raised her hands and slowly removed the atmosphere. The device was 2 simple rings in a crown-like structure, much more fragile than the original nerve gear, but without the same sensation of being clamped into place. Even back in the real world, her cheeks were still ablaze. She sat up in bed, slapped her face, and raised a silent wail inside her chest. Waves of belated embarrassment crashed over her at her boldness. Rekon, her classmate Shinichi Nagata, once said that when Sukaha was Leafa, she was at least 50% bolder. Today's escapade was well above that mark. She writhed in agony, her legs flopping on the bed. He was such a strange boy. Well, there was no saying whether the player was actually a boy, but Sukaha's instinct told her he was quite close to her age. But between his relaxed demeanor and his occasional mischievous remarks, it was hard to tell for sure. His personality wasn't the only mystery, though. Where did that incredible strength come from? In her year of playing ALO, he was the first person she'd come across who didn't seem beatable in a duel. She spoke his name very quietly. Kirito, huh? The first time that Sukaha had felt the urge to see a virtual world for herself was just about a year after the SAO incident began. Until then, the concept of a VR MMO was nothing but a target of loathing to her, the tool that had literally stolen her brother from her. But the more she held Kazuto's hand as he slept in his hospital bed, the more she spoke to his deaf ears, the more she began to wonder what his world was like. It was up to her to bridge the distance that was now between them, she had thought. Midori had given her a long, hard look when Sukaha said she wanted an atmosphere, but she eventually granted her daughter's request, asking only that she be mindful of the time and her health. The next day at lunch, Sukaha visited the desk of Shinichi Nagata, the biggest gamer in class, for better or for worse, and asked him to come up to the roof with her to discuss a serious topic. The absolute silence and subsequent frenzy of the class after the scene was still the stuff of legend. Leaning against the chain-link fence around the roof, Sukaha asked the hopelessly anticipatory Nagata to teach her about VR MMOs. After several seconds and an entire emotional spectrum of facial expressions, he asked her what kind of game she had in mind. When Sukaha told him that she couldn't take any time away from her studies and kendo practice, Nagata pushed his glasses up on his nose and muttered some gibberish like, "You'll want a skill-based entry rather than a grindfest time sink then." ultimately, his best recommendation was Alfheim Online. She hadn't been expecting him to start playing ALO with her, but with the help of his thorough tutorials, Sugaha found that she was surprisingly well suited to this virtual world game. There were two main reasons. First, Sugaha's years of diligent kendo study translated extremely well into the game. When players squared off in battle, evasion was a foreign concept. It was a foregone conclusion that both sides would hit the other. As long as your total damage was higher, the battle was won. But Sugaha's well-trained reflexes and instincts meant she could easily avoid most attacks. In a way, her almost unfair skill at the game was a natural outcome. If ALO had been a level-based MMO like so many others, the lack of time to invest in her character meant she would never match the core players. In fact, among the veterans of ALO, Leafa's stats were actually below average. It was only because ALO was such a skill-based game that she was powerful enough to be considered one of the 5 great sylphs. The second thing that drew Sugaha to the game was something entirely unique to ALO: the flight system. She could still easily remember the sensation of absolute joy the first time she got the knack of voluntary flight and was able to fly of her own free will. Sugaha was small. Her lack of reach in kendo bouts was a constant thorn in her side. And as a response, she had learned from a young age to always go faster, farther. So the way that ALO let her use that long katana in an overhead stance, impossible when one hand was holding a flight stick, and then slash through foes at extreme long range, was bliss beyond compare. And beyond that, there were the sharp dives that threatened to shake her to pieces, the long, gentle cruises at high elevation among the flocks of birds, and so much more. With the act of flying, Sugaha was deeply in love. So while slow, clumsy Rekon called her a raging speedaholic, Sugaha couldn't imagine playing ALO without the joy of flight. After a year of experience in the game, Sugaha was a fully dedicated VR MMO player. She'd started this experiment to grow closer to her brother, and now she loved it for what it was. Several times a day since Kazuto had come back, Sugaha had desperately wanted to talk to him about ALO, to share the pains and pleasures of the virtual world she'd finally come to understand with him. But the sight of the shadows behind his eyes kept her from ever broaching the subject. She was certain that even after the horrors of the SAO incident, Kazuto still loved the idea of a virtual world. All the nerve gears were supposedly recalled, but he had gotten his back somehow. And the Sword Art Online ROM card was stuck in the photo stand on his desk. But the SAO incident wasn't over for Kazuto. Not until she woke up. The thought tore Sugaha's heart to pieces. She never wanted to see him cry in such terrible despair again, the way he had last night. She wanted him to have a smile on his face at all times. And for that reason, she wanted his lost love to wake up. But she knew that when it happened, Kazuto's heart would be forever beyond her reach. If only they'd been actual siblings. She'd never have come to feel this way. She'd never desire to keep Kazuto all to herself. She lay back in bed and stared at the poster of the Alfheim sky. Sugaha wondered why people didn't have wings. She wished she could fly as far as she wanted in the real sky, until the tangled web around her heart was blown away.